Okay, stay with me here because I need to walk you through something that is genuinely unprecedented. Last week, something happened in the United States Senate that we haven't seen in a very, very long time. Republican senators, not Democrats, not independents, Republicans voted against their own president on one of the most fundamental questions a democracy can ask: who gets to start a war? And when Donald Trump found out what happened, he didn't pick up the phone to negotiate. He didn't call to persuade. He called Senator Susan Collins of Maine, and according to multiple sources with direct knowledge of that conversation, he unleashed a profanity-laced tirade so intense that veteran lawmakers, people who have been in Washington for decades, people who've seen everything, were left genuinely stunned. One Republican senator described it to The Hill as Trump reading her the riot act. The source said he was very mad about the vote, very mad, very hot. And then Trump did something remarkable. He picked up the phone and called all 5 of the Republican senators who had defied him, every single one of them. According to NBC News, he threatened each of them with primary challenges. He vowed to unseat them from the Senate. Now, if you're watching this, you need to understand exactly what we're witnessing here. Subscribe to this channel right now and turn on notifications because this story is moving fast and you need to stay informed. What I'm about to walk you through represents a genuine rupture in the American political system, and the implications extend far beyond any single vote. Let me take you back to how we got here. In 1973, after years of watching presidents drag this country into military conflicts without congressional approval, after Vietnam, after Cambodia, after secret bombings and body bags, and a generation of young Americans sent to die for decisions made in back rooms, Congress passed the War Powers Resolution. It was supposed to be a firewall, a constitutional guardrail, a promise that never again would one person alone decide to send Americans into combat. That law sat on the books for 50 years. And on January 8th, 2026, 5 Republicans activated it against their own president. Let me say that again so it lands properly. The president's own party moved to legally restrain his ability to use military force. The vote was 52 to 47. Every single Democrat voted yes, and they were joined by 5 Republicans who broke ranks: Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Rand Paul of Kentucky, Josh Hawley of Missouri, and Todd Young of Indiana. Here's what you need to understand about why this happened. Trump didn't just float military action against some disputed territory in some far-off corner of the world. He didn't target a rogue state or a known adversary. He suggested taking Greenland by force. Greenland, which is not an unclaimed rock in the middle of the ocean. Greenland, which is part of Denmark. Denmark, which is a NATO ally. Denmark, which is a country we are treaty-bound, legally, formally on paper to defend. And the President of the United States said, and I'm going to quote him directly here, "We are going to do something in Greenland, whether they like it or not. Whether they like it or not." Think about what that means. Republican Congressman Michael McCaul, who serves as chairman emeritus of both the House Foreign Affairs and Homeland Security committees, laid this out in terms so stark they should be taught in civics classes. He said that militarily invading Greenland would turn Article 5 of NATO on its very head and, in essence, press a war with NATO itself. It would end up abolishing NATO as we know it. Article 5 is the collective defense provision, the promise that an attack on one is an attack on all. We would be attacking an ally. We would be at war with NATO. We would be at war with ourselves. And Republican senators heard that. They did the math. They looked at their constitutional oaths. And for once, enough of them said, we need to draw a line. So they voted, and Trump responded the way he always responds when anyone anywhere dares to tell him no, not with persuasion, not with negotiation, not with the tools of democratic politics, with fury, with threats, with intimidation. He took to Truth Social within hours of the vote and wrote, "Republicans should be ashamed of the senators that just voted with Democrats in attempting to take away our powers to fight and defend the United States of America. Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Rand Paul, Josh Hawley, and Todd Young should never be elected to office again." Let that sink in. The President of the United States publicly calling for the defeat of members of his own party because they exercise their constitutional authority on questions of war and peace. Now here's where this gets really interesting and really dangerous. 6 days after that initial vote, on January 14th, the Senate took up the resolution again, and 2 of those 5 Republicans, Josh Hawley and Todd Young, flipped their votes. After receiving what they described as assurances from the administration, after a letter from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, after intense pressure from Trump and his team, they reversed course and joined Republicans in using a procedural maneuver to kill the resolution. The vote was tied 50-50. And Vice President J.D. Vance came down to the Senate floor and cast the tie-breaking vote to end it. The war powers resolution was dead. But here's what most people are missing. This story doesn't end with that vote. It's just beginning. If you're finding this valuable, hit that like button right now because this story is about to get significantly more complicated. Because at the exact same moment the Senate was fighting over Venezuela, the Greenland situation was escalating dramatically. Former Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell, who chairs the Senate Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, which controls the Pentagon budget, walked onto the Senate floor and delivered one of the most searing rebukes of a sitting president from a member of his own party that we've seen in decades. McConnell warned that seizing Greenland by force would, and I'm quoting directly here, incinerate the hard-won trust of loyal allies in exchange for no meaningful change in U.S. access to the Arctic. Incinerate. That's not a word you use casually. That's not a word you use when you're trying to be diplomatic. That's a word you use when you're sounding an alarm. McConnell called Trump's threats against Greenland ill-advised and warned they would shatter the trust of allies if acted upon. Then he said something extraordinary. He said, following through on this provocation would be more disastrous for the president's legacy than withdrawing from Afghanistan was for his predecessor. Think about that framing. A senior Republican comparing Trump's Greenland ambitions to what Republicans considered one of the greatest foreign policy disasters in modern American history. And McConnell wasn't alone. Senator Thom Tillis of North Carolina, who's retiring at the end of this term and therefore has nothing left to lose, went to the Senate floor and said something that's already being repeated across Washington. He said, "I am sick of stupid. I am sick of stupid." That's a sitting Republican senator describing his own president's foreign policy agenda. Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma said simply, "Greenland, the Danes are allies. We cannot do military action in Greenland. Should not, cannot." Republican Congressman Don Bacon of Nebraska went even further. He told the Omaha World Herald that if Trump actually invaded Greenland, it would lead to impeachment proceedings, and he said he would lean towards supporting them. A Republican congressman saying he would lean toward impeaching a Republican president over Greenland. Stay with me here because I need to connect some dots. What we're watching isn't just political disagreement. This isn't the usual Washington kabuki where people posture for cameras and then fall in line. This is something more fundamental. This is a stress test of American constitutional democracy happening in real time. And to understand why, you need to understand something about how power works in this country. The presidency is not a throne. It never was. The founders had just fought a war against a king. They weren't about to create a new one. So they designed a system built on friction, deliberately slow, deliberately cumbersome, requiring negotiation and compromise and coalition building. They distributed power across branches, across institutions, across competing interests. And for 250 years, that system has functioned not because every president respected it willingly, but because enough people within the system enforced it. What we're watching right now is a test of whether that enforcement still works, because Trump doesn't just push against limits, he denies their legitimacy entirely. When he suggests military force against allied territory, when he indicates that treaties are suggestions rather than obligations, when he frames his own judgment as the only relevant standard, he's not just being aggressive. He's articulating a theory of presidential power that is fundamentally incompatible with constitutional governance. The polling on this is absolutely clear. A Reuters Ipsos poll found that only 17% of Americans support a U.S. takeover of Greenland. Only 4% support taking it by force. A Quinnipiac poll found 86% of Americans oppose military action against Greenland. And yet the president continues to insist that he will do it whether they like it or not. So Republican lawmakers are scrambling. Senators Tillis and Murkowski traveled to Copenhagen to meet with Danish officials. They wanted to assure the Danish Prime Minister that there would be substantial Republican opposition to any military action. Tillis told reporters, "I'm going to remind them that we have co-equal branches of government." Senator Murkowski, along with Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen, introduced legislation that would prohibit the use of Defense Department funds to blockade, occupy, annex, or conduct military operations against Greenland or any sovereign territory of a NATO member state. And here's the thing that's being reported that really matters. An anonymous Republican senator told The Hill that Trump's talk of taking over Greenland has generated more opposition from Republicans than almost anything else. The senator said, "I have no understanding how this is an idea to begin with. Let me show you the pattern because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Challenge comes, escalation follows, crisis language drowns out oversight, congressional pushback on war powers, escalate the rhetoric about national security threats, questions about constitutional limits, declare that treaties don't matter. Internal party revolt, frame it as establishment betrayal, demand loyalty tests, pick up the phone and scream at Susan Collins. It's not random, it's systematic, and the system serves a purpose, keeping everyone moving too fast to focus on any single issue long enough to demand real answers. But here's what's different about this moment. Congress isn't just an audience anymore. At least parts of it aren't. The procedural machinery is starting to engage war powers resolutions, legislation to prohibit defense spending, floor speeches from party leaders, trips to Copenhagen, inspector general review requests. These are the boring, technical, unglamorous tools of constitutional accountability. They don't make for exciting television. They don't trend on social media. They don't generate the kind of conflict that drives cable news ratings. But they work. They work slowly. They work quietly. They accumulate documentation that doesn't go away, and they're being activated. Now, I know this can feel abstract. War powers, constitutional limits, NATO treaties. What does any of this actually mean for regular people trying to live their lives? Here's the answer: everything. When a president can unilaterally commit military force against an ally, it's your children who could get deployed, your neighbors, your community members. When treaties become suggestions, it's your economic stability that gets threatened as allies reconsider their partnerships. When trust in institutions breaks down, really breaks down, the consequences ripple through everything. Markets become volatile because investors can't predict policy. Businesses hesitate because the rules might change overnight. Your retirement account dips because markets are nervous. Your gas prices fluctuate because energy markets are disrupted. Your small business struggles because supply chains are thrown into chaos by unpredictable trade actions. Senator Murkowski said it plainly. She said, "Our NATO allies are being forced to divert attention and resources to Greenland, a dynamic that plays directly into Putin's hands by threatening the stability of the strongest coalition of democracies the world has ever seen." Drop a comment right now. Tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this is reaching, because here's the part that should keep you awake tonight. This isn't just about Trump. Whatever you think of him personally, love him, hate him, something in between, he won't be president forever. Eventually, there will be a different person in that office. And that person will inherit every precedent that gets set now. Every power that goes unchallenged becomes normalized. Every norm that gets broken without consequence becomes available to the next president. Every emergency declaration that Congress waves through without scrutiny, every threat against an ally that doesn't trigger immediate, overwhelming pushback, it all becomes part of the toolkit. Democrat, Republican, someone we haven't heard of yet. Precedents don't have party affiliations, they just exist. And once they exist, they are very, very hard to undo. This is what the framers understood. This is what constitutional scholars have been warning about for years, and this is what's finally breaking through to some Republican lawmakers. The realization that protecting the institution sometimes means opposing the person who currently runs it. So where does this go? I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know. Anyone who tells you they know exactly how this plays out is not being straight with you. But I can tell you what I'm watching for. I'm watching to see whether the Republicans who spoke out on Greenland actually hold that line, or whether they quietly return to alignment once the immediate controversy fades, once the primary threats start, once the base applies pressure. Because that will tell us whether this moment represents genuine institutional reassertion or just temporary turbulence before the system capitulates again. We already saw what happened with the Venezuela war powers vote. 5 Republicans broke ranks, Trump applied pressure, 2 of them flipped, and the resolution died. That's the playbook. That's how it works. The question is whether enough Republicans are willing to break the pattern. Senator Van Hollen put it bluntly. He said, "A lot of our Republican colleagues talk big until it comes time to vote. History suggests institutions can reassert themselves when enough people choose to defend them. But history also shows that requires sustained effort, not isolated votes, not momentary courage that evaporates under pressure. Sustained, ongoing, uncomfortable effort. The next several months will reveal which pattern this follows. Here's what you need to take away from this. 1. The revolt is coming from inside the party. Democrats opposing Trump is expected, it's priced in. Republicans doing so on fundamental questions of war powers and NATO alliances. That's a structural shift that wasn't happening 6 months ago. Something has changed in the calculation for at least some of them. That matters. 2. Trump's response to dissent tells you everything you need to know about how he views presidential power. When members of his own party exercise their constitutional authority, he doesn't negotiate. He threatens. He calls them at their offices and screams profanities. He takes to social media and calls for their political destruction. That's not how a president interacts with a co-equal branch of government. That's how an autocrat responds to disloyalty. 3. What happens now sets precedent for everything that comes after. Every norm broken without consequence becomes available to the next president and the next and the next. Defending the system sometimes means opposing the person running it. That realization is what's finally breaking through to some Republican lawmakers. Whether it breaks through to enough of them, whether it lasts, that's the question this moment is asking. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on because this story is far from finished. Senator Tim Kaine has already said he plans to introduce war powers resolutions for Greenland, for Mexico, for Cuba, for Colombia, anywhere Trump threatens military action. The votes will keep coming, the pressure will keep building. The question is whether the system holds. I want to leave you with something bigger than just this story. What we're watching isn't a single crisis. It's an ongoing question about what kind of country America chooses to be. Are we a nation of laws where power is genuinely constrained by constitutional limits, or are we something else? A nation where laws exist on paper but bend in practice whenever someone powerful enough decides to push against them? That question doesn't get answered once. It gets answered over and over again through thousands of decisions made by lawmakers and judges and voters and citizens who pay attention when it would be easier to look away. Mitch McConnell, who spent years enabling Trump's agenda, stood on the Senate floor and warned that the president's approach would incinerate alliances that generations of Americans built and defended. Tom Tillis said he's sick of stupid. Don Bacon said he'd consider impeachment. These aren't profiles in courage. These are calculations. These are politicians who've looked at the trajectory and decided that some lines cannot be crossed without catastrophic consequences. The question is whether there are enough of them and whether they'll hold when the pressure comes. Democracy isn't a spectator sport. It never was. It's a project, one that requires active participation from people who understand the stakes. And right now, in this moment, the stakes could not be higher. I'll see you tomorrow.